want to thank everyone for coming to this kickoff of the Health Equity Book Series presented by the Division of Health Disparities Elimination, the Office of Primary Prevention, and the Health Equity Advisory Team at the Tennessee Department of Health. My name is Elizabeth Hart, and I am the Director of the Office of Faith-Based and Community Engagement that's within the Division of Health Disparities Elimination under the leadership of Dr. Kimberly Lamar. We are so excited for this conversation today and to kick off this amazing book series. But first, a couple of housekeeping rules, a couple of housekeeping notes, I should say. If you have a question or comments that you would like to convey to our guests or be part of the conversation, we encourage you to drop those in the chat feature. We'll make sure that we're taking a look at that throughout this conversation. Additionally, if you are attending today's book series, you may be a member already of our Tennessee Health Disparity Task Force. But if you are not, and if you were forwarded this invitation to this conversation, we want to invite you and we encourage you to join our Tennessee Health Disparity Task Force, where we focus on 4 priority areas of chronic disease, mental health, infectious disease, and environmental health and justice. To learn more about this the Health Disparity Task Force, go to www.healthdisparities.tn.com. Once again, that is www.healthdisparities.tn.com. Additionally, we send out a weekly correspondence to stakeholders with all kinds of great information, including webinar and funding opportunities. If you would like to receive that information, send an email to elizabeth.hart@tn.gov. Again, that's elizabeth.hart@tn.gov. So now I want to introduce our incredible guests today. We are excited, honored, thrilled, all of the wonderful things to have this conversation about the legend and the legacy of Henrietta Lacks. So let's welcome Miss Victoria Baptiste and Shirley Lacks. Victoria is Henrietta Lacks' great-granddaughter. She travels regularly to talk about the Lacks family story. She's inspired by Henrietta's life. She's a nephrology nurse at a dialysis center. As a patient's advocate, Victoria prides herself on treating patients with respect and dignity, and most importantly, making sure they understand their care. She finds her career fulfilling because it gives her the opportunity to educate patients. And Shirley Lacks. She is Henrietta Lacks' daughter-in-law and Deborah's childhood best friend. Since retiring from the banking industry, Shirley has dedicated much of her time to traveling around the country, keeping Henrietta's legacy alive as a promise to her sister-in-law, Deborah Lacks. Henrietta's enormous contribution to science has afforded Shirley the opportunity to be a voice for patient rights. Shirley has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. Why don't we welcome these ladies to our conversation? Welcome, Shirley and Victoria.
Thank you so much for having us.
Welcome.
We really are really happy to be a part of this today.
Wonderful.
Yes, we are, in our honor.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate your time today. So let's just jump right into the conversation. So can you share with us some things that your family remembers about Henrietta? You know, what was she like? Can you share a story maybe that you've heard, and how did others describe her?
You know, I was, of course, not even a thought in my mother's mind before they lost you know, my great grandmother. But stories that I've heard told about her was just how gracious she was and how giving she was as a person, how family members and friends would come up from Clover to try to work, you know, at the steel mills and things here in Maryland. And she would, you know, welcome them to her home. She would make sure that they had lunches and things until, you know, they got on their feet and were able to do better and bring their families up. I was told that she liked to dance. She liked to look good. You know, but I feel like a lot of that is still embodied in the women in this family. We still like to take care of each other. We still like to cook and, have a good time. So I feel like that part is really ingrained in all of us.
What about you, Shirley?
Well, I just want to add to what Victoria said. Really, when I came married into the family, didn't know anything. My husband didn't even talk about his mom. And later on in the years, as his sister and I, became so engrossed with wanting to know about her mom. And that's when I started to learn about Henrietta after my sister-in-law, Deborah, went on this uh, went on this adventure to find out about her mom with Rebecca Sloot. There's a whole lot that happened before she found Rebecca, but that's when the entire family started to know more about Henrietta. And as Victoria said, we were just amazed at how loving, giving, caring, empathetic, and just what a wonderful person she was. And when I looked around at her children, I could understand the reason why they were the way they were, because they had inherited that DNA from their mom.
So you kind of talked about Rebecca, and Rebecca, of course, is the author of the book that I know we've sent out to all of our followers and friends that are on the webinar today, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lack. So speaking of the book details when your family found out about those cells, when a family member was over at a friend's house. What do you think it was like to have found out that way?
I mean, I imagine for Mama, that was who found out for us, Babette Lax, my mama. Um, I imagine it was quite jarring and almost a slap in the face, because to know that, your husband and his siblings had been tested on themselves, had doctors come to the house and take blood samples and things from them, and never to hear back what the results were one way or the other, or even know what they actually did. Was it for research? Did you really just run some labs? To hear it over casual conversation at a lunch, like, oh yeah, by the way, that name is not that, common. We're using a woman named Henrietta Lax's cells at Hopkins in the lab. That had to be really like, a slap, you know, not only, in the face, but like it's a reality, like, wow, this is still going on. They're still doing stuff and they're not telling the family about it. They've tested on them and never told them about it. And here I am, just thinking I'm at a friend's house for lunch and to hear this. So yeah, that had to be very jarring for her, and take her quite aback.
And I would just like to add to what Victoria said. I'm quite sure, as she said, very jarring. And I think it was pretty much shocking because there were family members during that time that did not have medical coverage, and they had problems getting to see a doctor and getting, the right medication and being taken care of properly. And to realize that here their mom's cells have done so much for the world, and here's a family that nobody knew about or thought about, to say, hey, this family, mother, wife, have helped the world. What can we do to help them as far as covering medical, especially John Hopkins, because John Hopkins knew about Henrietta. They knew about her cells. And some of the family members had been to John Hopkins. My husband had been to John Hopkins for medical conditions. And instead of them helping him, he ended up with a great big medical bill because he had triple bypass heart surgery. And just to think that, her cells were being used, and yet her family, immediate family, didn't have the decent, especially her children, some of her children didn't have decent medical coverage.
Yeah. Wow, just incredible story. So as we think about how your family processed the fact that those cells were taken, what were the family's first feelings on, and how did they progress over time, and how did you all cope with this news?
Well, for my
Well, I think that
generation, it was a little bit different because kids, I tell people this all the time, is when I was growing up, kids were seen and not heard. So when they were having, if they were having any adult conversations about this, we were not privy to that. And, we only know what we were told. I really, the most I heard about it maybe when I was, 10, 11 or something in passing, like my mom saying, they're using your great grandmother's cells at Hopkins for research, but that was the extent of it. She never really sat down and explained that. I learned the most that I know started with the journey of when this book happened. And it was a lot to take in for me to learning all this with everyone else. And then having to go back to the elders in our family and basically fact check, like, hold on, just for clarity's sake, is this true? Like, I know what it says, but I need you to say it to me. It was a lot to take in, but that was not a topic that was brought up a lot for my generation. Like, they did not speak on it. My great grandfather, who I did have the privilege to grow up with, Daylax, never talked to me about my great grandmother. It just wasn't a topic that they talked about often. So yeah, I learned a lot of what I know once the book came out, and then the family kind of opened up into these conversations based off of that. Well, at least for the younger generation, the ones who didn't have the privilege to have a seat at the table for those type of conversations. Auntie?
Yeah, I'm gonna say Shirley's probably had a different perspective.
Exactly.
Well, this actually started, I guess, back in the early 70s. Morehouse School of Medicine, where Dr. Roland Patillo actually was the first one that introduced and talked to the family in reference to Henrietta Lacks and her cells. I think it was back in 1997 where Dr. Patillo, he started, I think it was called the Women Health Conference, and he invited the family to that conference. And at the time, it was Bobette Lacks, Deborah, David, my husband, Dave's, my father-in-law and his wife and my nephew. They all went there. And when they had that conference, my sister-in-law, Deborah, became very much intrigued because she did not know much of anything about her mom because, as Victoria said, Henrietta's husband didn't talk about his wife. My husband didn't talk about her because he didn't know much about her because she died when he was very, very young. And the oldest sibling, which was Lawrence Lacks, he didn't talk about it because learning later on in years was so traumatizing as to what had taken place that he had buried all these feelings and to try to, they were beginning to resurface as people began to talk about his mom and the cells. So it was a little different. And as Victoria said, we really didn't find out a whole lot until after the book came out. That was one of Deborah's main goal and focus, is to make sure the world knew who her mom was. The world knew where the HeLa cells came from, because that was like a hush hush. When it first was out there, it was everybody's name except for Henrietta Lacks.
And Lawrence Lacks, is the eldest son, is my grandfather. And like she was saying, it's resurfacing some of those memories for him. And he comes out with pockets of conversations now, as it's a healing journey for him right now.
Yeah. And kind of speaking about the healing journey and having to relive some of that, this is an interesting question for the both of you all, but do you think that race played a part in all that happened with her?
Absolutely. Race played a part because we have to think of the time in which this story took place, right? She was an African American woman back in the 1950s. We didn't have, a lot of rights, let alone access to care. Okay, to be realistic about it. And Hopkins at the time was one of the hospitals that, allowed access to care to people of color and low socioeconomic means. So that what her having to go to Hopkins definitely played a part because of her race. Her treatment, yes, because back then the wards were segregated. They had the colored ward, and then they had, the white ward. And, so the treatment and the accessibility to different treatment implements differentiated because of that. So, of course, her race played a part in that. Her lack of knowledge, them giving her the information, all the information about her treatment options and what each one of those treatments entailed. I definitely played a part, because back then it was kind of like, we're giving you treatment, you kind of get what you get type of a situation, because you were lucky to be seen.
Yeah.
So yes, it definitely played a part. And then afterwards, after she passed away from metastatic cervical cancer, and they had this great, medical find, they even disguised her name.
Mm-hmm.
And because why? They didn't want people to know that this came from a Black woman. I mean, we were still, going through, like I said, segregation, racism. I mean, was a lot more prevalent, more in your face then. We knew where the lines were drawn.
Right.
So we knew that any medical research that was going to come from these great cells, the people weren't going to be ready to know that it came from a Black woman, because back then, if you had one drop of Black
Yep.
in you, then you're Black, right? All of a
Right.
sudden. So that definitely played a big part. So yes, race played, parts from, I feel like, from beginning of her journey till the
Mm-hmm.
end, as far as access to the care,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of information and transparency that was afforded to her by her physicians, um, played a part with the race, and as well as, the finds that they found from her afterwards. They still, them having to disguise her and not say her name, all played a part because of race, in my opinion.
Wow. And Shirley, do you think that Henrietta would have given permission for researchers to use her cells, had she actually been informed about what all was involved?
I think she would have given permission, because from just the journey that Deborah took finding out about her mom, she was such a caring person, and she had a lot of empathy for people. Um, she just, from the information I gathered, except for one thing, she may not have, because from my understanding, she loved children. And if it had any way impacted her of not having any more children, no, she would not have. But otherwise, I think I know that she would have, because of all the information and people talking about her that knew her,
Mhm.
and how kind and big her heart was, and how she was always open to help people in any way that she could. So yes.
Thank you for that. And I know before the webinar started, we were talking about the role that the HeLa cells have played in the COVID-19 vaccine. So how do you think that Henrietta would react upon finding out that her cells are still alive today, and the role that they are playing in so many important medical discoveries, such as the COVID-19 vaccine that we've all been talking about over the last year and a half or so?
I think she would be immensely proud, that she's able to impact so many people and save lives, every day. And, as a nurse, and I'm out here now vaccinating people, patients everywhere, for COVID-19. So, I know that has a great impact on me every day, knowing that I'm able to um, keep her legacy alive through myself and through giving, excellent patient care, and knowing that I'm using the implementations that were possible because of my great grandmother.
Mm.
It's just an honor. So I know that she would be, ecstatic about the impact she's been able to, because again, we were always told how caring she was and how she always opened her doors to help people. So this, how, what better honor than to know that you were able to help people globally and not just in your local community.
Isn't that just incredible? Just to think about that her cells have been used as in the research and the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. Just amazing. So surely, many readers are struck by the role of Deborah during the quest to learn more about Henrietta's life. What was Deborah like, and was she as charismatic as Rebecca wrote in the book?
Yes, Deborah was very charismatic. Deborah was, you know, when I think about Deborah's mom and what we learned about Deborah's mom, I'd say Deborah has that same DNA because she loved everybody and everybody that she met was a friend. She could love you 1 minute and she could knock you out the next minute. But once it's all over with, she still, that love comes back. And she was a very caring person. She was innovative. She loved people. She loved her family, especially her grandchildren and her nieces. She was just all around. She always had children. She, like her mom, she always had children around her.
I was always over there.
As a matter of fact, she kind of like raised my children because she told me I didn't know how to raise my children. So she took took over that role. But yes, she was very charismatic, and Victoria from the younger generation can also attest to the fact of what a wonderful aunt that
It was never a dull moment with Aunt Deborah, or
Never.
Aunt Dale, as we lovingly call her. So if we slip up and say Dale, that's who we mean. We mean Aunt Deborah. It was never a dull moment with her. Rainy days, outside you couldn't go play. She always made some type of thing for us to do, or even if it was going in the kitchen and baking something, or having a good time. She just always made it eventful. We all love going to Aunt Deborah's house so much that at one point growing up, I tried to run away from home. I didn't live that far from her, but I was like, I'm going to Aunt Deborah's house, and that's where they found me, right at her front door. But she wasn't home. I was disappointed. That just shows how loving and caring, and how awesome of a time we had with Aunt Deborah growing up.
How do you
The
think
book
that she would
didn't touch
react
it
to the
all.
book? Yeah, how do you think she'd react to the book?
I think she would be, elated that, this journey that she went on with Rebecca was finally, they finally got to the end of it. She finally got, some type of closure and, the information that she was seeking. She will never get her mother back, but at least she got to find out some impactful ways that her mother contributed to her, to everybody's lives, and continuously helping people every day. I feel like she would be elated in that aspect of it. Yeah. And also, how people were, gravitated towards it, and, how much success became, the book had, and the amount of conversations we're having now and changes that are being made because of those things. Yes, I think she would really be ecstatic.
What do you think, Shirley? You agree?
I agree, but I agree to that wholeheartedly. Evidently, she knew the book was going to be a success because, from my understanding, she had asked Rebecca if the book became a movie, she wanted Oprah to play her. So evidently, she knew that that book was going to be successful. So that was just the kind of person she was. When she believed something, she believed it, and most of the time, things that she believed in, and she was a person that did not back down.
Yeah.
What did she believed in? She stood on that.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful moments in that book is when Deborah actually saw the HeLa cells for the first time. And so my
Yes.
question to both of you, have you seen the cells? And if so, what was your reaction when you saw them, if you saw them?
Yes, we've all had a chance. Well, most of us have all had a chance to see the cells in action. They used to have something called family cell day. Like, we used to go to Hopkins, and we could go and see like the cells underneath the microscope periodically, to see how they reacted. So yes, we've all seen them, and they never look the same twice. They always look something different, and especially with the millions and millions of dollars of equipment that they have, you really get to see how fast they are able to multiply and everything. So it was really a great experience.
And I
What
just
about
want to
you,
add,
Shirley?
yeah, I just want to add, I thought that it was so fascinating in the fact that I looked at the self and I go, is this what's inside of our bodies? If it doesn't work properly, is this the way it looks, even though, they said they had it under some dye and everything. But I was just really taken back. And I thought about when we talk about the cells and how it helped people and the polio vaccine. And I remember
That's
when
right.
I was younger and I got vaccinated for polio. And I said, I never would have thought in a million years I would be part of a family where that the mother of my husband was responsible for this polio vaccine that I got to keep me from getting polio. It was just amazing. And it, and like I said, just watching and looking at that cell is like, okay, look, I think about what's inside of me.
Yeah, that is amazing. And I'm sure that that's an overwhelming feeling for you, I'm sure, and the rest of the family. Really, this question is for Victoria. You are a nurse, and so do you think that this book should be, and by the book I mean The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I'm going to keep repeating this a couple of times throughout the conversation. Do you think it should be required reading for nursing and medical students on how not to treat a patient?
I think it should be a required read for a multitude of reasons, not even just for science majors, because it brings up a lot of other questions with ethics, with the policies and things that we have in place. So I think not just even nursing students. I think it should be a great common read for all freshmen classes that are going into any type of major, because I feel like it's applicable. The journey has been applicable across professions on what you should and shouldn't do ethics wise, or even medically, not how not to treat a patient, or showing us how we can better some things. We have to chalk up to the era, and knowing that we've come farther than that and we can do better than that, and seeing the differences in those two things, and help us gain some better perspective. So I feel like it should be a common read for freshmen at any college, at any major.
Yeah, I would probably agree. How have the events that occurred, throughout this, not only that were captured in the book, but the stories that you all know in your family, how have they shaped your perspective about racial and cultural issues we're experiencing today?
Um, that is a good question. It's just, I feel like we've come far, yes, but
But not
we,
for
it just seems like in the climate that we've had, and I will say even in the last 12 years, um, we've seen that, yeah, we've come far, but we've not gotten there yet. And that's not even just in medicine. That's just throughout, the world right now, the climate that we're in. And then right now, I mean, look, we even can see how that impacts, in different countries, and how, people, feel like they're more worthy of something than someone else, and they can just take that. So I feel like this last decade has been an eye opener for us, because I feel like we got a false sense of comfort for a little while there, feeling like, oh, it's kumbaya and everything's the same and everybody's the same and we've all been afforded the same things. But now with the internet era, and a lot more transparency being forced and not just given, because this younger generation's putting everything out there for you to see. So you can't hide it anymore. So I think this last decade has been like an eye opener for us to see that, yeah, we thought we came further than this, but we really haven't. And we still have a lot of hard work and hard conversations left to be had and to be done.
What about you, Shirley?
I agree with Victoria. We have come some distance, but we still got some distance yet to go. And I think the whole thing that I feel as though we have gotten forgotten is that the love that once upon a time used to be within us. Of course, there are always people that don't, but it seems like the love now has been lost, and everything is all about me, what I want, how I get it, no matter which way I get it. And as Victoria said, it seems to have, within the last decade, it seems to have gone in the wrong direction, and trying to figure out how to get it back on track, it seems to be a miss. Nobody knows how to do that anymore. And instead of getting better, for the majority, it's getting worse. And there's people out there still fighting to try to bring us back together. But people always love to do the wrong thing instead of doing the right thing. More people like to do the wrong thing than the right thing. So, but I'm more than sure, maybe not in my time, we will get there as a world, as a nation. We will eventually get to where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the book does raise a number of difficult questions around bio and medical ethics. What do you think is the biggest lesson that we can learn from what happened to Henrietta?
In reference to bioethics is concerned, I feel like some of the things that we can learn is one, we need to be patient with our patients, meaning that when we give them, because now we, have afforded them, you know, informed consent. And I feel like we for that what informed consent is still, a broad term at times. Because I'm like, to me, informed consent is consent that I'm giving the information to the patient about, what the treatment is, what the prognosis could be, and what potential, side effects or adverse effects could happen in a language in which they understand. Informed consent to me is not just sliding over the forms and expecting them to be able to read and understand all of the medical information that's on there without, having a conversation with the patient. So I feel like we are busy, we are overworked, we are understaffed. I know I'm out here with y'all, I feel you, but I know that how important that extra couple of minutes can be, for you to just sit down with the patient or just say, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Did you understand the information that was just given to you? Can you repeat it back to me
Hmm.
and tell me what that means? Because that's the difference between knowing that you gave the information, you've covered yourself, because you can document that I gave the patient the information, but it's the difference between you giving it and the patient understanding it. So is it really informed? That's a big conversation that, you know, it relates directly towards, the treatment of my great grandmother and her not getting informed consent and how that turned out, for her and our family in the end. So that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about advocating for patients. And I feel like we all should take away from that. And also just remembering the humanity of the care that we're, the arena that we're in. Sometimes we are so stuck on the policy because you have all these parameters that you have to meet. You have to do it this way perfectly each time, every time, and document and all that. And I get that, but we have to remember that that there's a person we're implementing all this care for, and without them, we don't have a job because we went into the healthcare industry to care for people. So let's remember to care for the people and not just checking off the task on our list of orders that we got today. We can get wrapped up in the rat race sometimes, but we have to remember why we did it, why we chose to do it, because it was a choice. You didn't have to go through school and all those sleepless nights to become, a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, or whatever, for you just to not care about what you're doing now, right? So let's just always remember why we're doing it, and remember you can be on the other side of that, bed one day.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Shirley?
I understand and agree with Victoria. I can just use myself as an example because
Yeah.
back in January, and I can see the change in the doctor patient because I had back in January I was diagnosed with stage 0 cancer, and
Mm.
my doctors were very, very empathetic, very patient, and especially the cancer doctor. I was asking him different questions. As we always say, you have to advocate for yourself. Anyway, he
Absolutely.
was very kind. As Victoria said, he sat there. Every question I asked him, he answered me, and then he would ask me, "Is there anything else I need to answer for you? I know you got another question, Um, and then I went to see another doctor, and the same thing. What he did when I asked him the question, he repeated. He says, "I want to make sure that I understand what you're asking for." So I just to say, I think the doctors are coming around more and more. And I'm always talking about Victoria when I talk about the nurse and patients. I'll always use my niece and tell people how she care about people, making sure people understand what's going on with them. And she always says to them, if you don't know, ask.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask. So I agree with her as far as, putting yourself in that person's, sitting in that person, reversing the chair. What if it was you sitting there and you needed answers? You had a concern. You were nervous about something. and didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And you're too afraid to ask. But then when you ask, you feel like the doctors, it's like putting you off. So you just clam up and not say anything. But more and more people are beginning, more and more doctors now are beginning to understand the level of stress, and the nurses also, the level of stress that a person goes through when there's something going on with them that they don't understand, that they feel as though the doctor had the answer, and that's who they go to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what kinds of things are actually being done to remember Henrietta even today?
Victoria.
Well, there are a lot of things more recently being done to remember my great grandmother. Just this past October, the family with our Healer 100 Henrietta Lacks initiative got to go over to Europe. There was a statue unveiling for Henrietta that replaced a previous slave master. His name was Colston at the Bristol University. So they took down that when there was some social unrest. So the people took down that statue and it was replaced with Henrietta, a statue of Henrietta that was made by Helen Wilson Rowe. And she also did some paintings for the family years ago. So we've been in contact with this particular artist for a long time. They even have a QR code, which is popular now with with this era. That's right by the statue where you can scan it and it'll give you a history about Henrietta and also up to today how her statue wound up being placed there. My family just accepted a Sergeant General's Award from the WHO, from the World Health Organization. My pop Lawrence Lax was able to be there and accept the award on behalf of his mother. And of course, Morehouse School of Medicine has been doing things forever to commemorate Henrietta annually. They've been doing that every year for a very long time. Hopkins does an annual conference that kind of tells you what Henrietta cells are doing today in science. That's something that they started doing once the book came out. And there's continuously things coming up every day, but even as a family, we are commemorating Henrietta ourselves by having these type of conversations, and also with our family-led initiatives on the healer100.org website, where we have a virtual museum with different pictures and things that have come up over the years and events for Henrietta, with art, but it shows different types of events and things that are going on for her, and different partnerships and advocations that the family is doing together on our own platform. So we're commemorating her as well as a lot of other people.
That's what.
Yeah, and I just want to add that John Hopkins, the last that I've heard, is putting up a building. We'll do a building with Henrietta's name on it. They're in the planning stages now, even though it's great to have the building. But I just feel like John Hopkins could do a little bit more than just the building for the family. And also there's where Henrietta lived, there is an organization called the Henrietta Lacks Legacy Group. I think it's every August they honor Henrietta. Have a program honoring her, and they've been doing that for the last, I think, like 20 years now. So it's as Victoria said, it's still a lot going on to honor Henrietta, and more and more people are beginning to know who Henrietta Lacks is.
Yeah.
They recognize that name. If you have that last name of Lacks, a lot of time people will say, "Oh, are you related?" So there's quite a bit going on.
And I almost failed to mention, sorry, blaming on my mind and not my heart. The family actually, which was actually initially a brainchild of Aunt Shirley's daughter, Jerry, and my cousin David, which then springboarded into this Healer 100 Henrietta Lacks initiative, a 3-day conference the family is putting on to commemorate Henrietta. And it's for, different healthcare, work people in the field, and also, different local officials, different community members, to try to keep having, conversations on how we can do better with the information we know about what happened with my great grandmother. How can we make sure that these things don't still happen? And we're looking forward to doing that this fall. So if you are interested in being a participant and coming to that conference, please feel free to, again, stay tuned to halo100.org.
We'll make sure we get that information from you and send that out to all those that were attending today, and to our greater group, our distribution list. We do have a question from the audience I wanted to ask. As we continue to combat structural racism in medicine, what about your family story do you think can help ground us and guide us as we continue to dismantle structural racism?
One thing that I feel like we can try to get across, that you could be the other person. Like, none of us are exempt to disease, to heartache, to pain. None of us are exempt. I know, years ago they had studies on how Black people apparently could tolerate more pain than other people. It's not true. We hurt too. So just remember that we are all the same when it comes to biology. We are all created the same. When it comes to treatment of your patients, you should not see color. You should not see religion. You took the oath. We took the oath when we got into the field that we wouldn't. That's not what the basis is. We're going in at the bedside to treat the person that needs us, and that is regardless of their background. I don't care if they were a drug addict, a convict. That is not for us to decide. We are not the judge and the jury. We are here as healthcare professionals to make sure that that person lives to see the judge and the jury. Okay? So we have to remember that we are not above anyone else. We should all be treating each one of us as if they were, someone that we care dearly about as well. And that ethics, a big part of ethics, we need to remember that what's that philosophy question? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Or just because nobody's watching, should you still do the right thing? The answer is yes. Yes, you should. Just because nobody is watching, that doesn't mean that you should take a shortcut or take your bad mood out on somebody because nobody can see you. We still need to make sure that we are doing what we set up to do. We are here to fight the good fight, and for the greater good of everyone, not just our families, not just people that we can see, for everyone. So in order to do that, we have to be unbiased and open-hearted to do those things. So I think that that's a big thing that we can all take away from this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So another question, do you believe this book has helped to create a legacy for your grandmother and your family? And by book, I mean, I'll repeat it again, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
I don't know if the book created a legacy because, well, just it depends on how you look at what legacy means.
Right.
To me, her legacy will always be her family.
Yeah.
We are her legacy. We are who she left behind. But the book did help create it created a place for for us to be able to springboard to talk about her, talk about her legacy or her history, so to speak, not even just for everyone out there, but for us as a family. It allowed us to be on a journey of healing through transparency as a family. So it did give us a different platform to be able to do good, not even just for everyone else, but for our family as well, by having those conversations and seeing how important it is to be transparent and not keep those generational secrets and things like that. But it's also given us, that same type of platform to advocate for other people, to make sure that they don't have the same issues that our family had, and that we don't keep on creating the same bad behaviors and mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. What about you, Shirley?
I just want to add to what Victoria said. It keeps the awareness, her legacy keeps the awareness through her family to keep people informed as to what took place, even though it was back in 1951. Still, certain things are still happening today in 2022. So with Henrietta's legacy through her family, we can help to continue to keep that legacy alive, letting people know that you have to, as I always say, you have to look out for self. Like Henrietta didn't have anyone that she could go to to help her navigate through what she was going through. So now that her descendants can be a voice to continue that legacy, to make sure what happened to her doesn't happen to someone now.
Absolutely. Speaking of her legacy and the woman that you all know as the matriarch of your family, there were so many details of your family that were in this book. Is there anything that you would like to tell all of us today to help us understand your family better than even what's not in the book?
I think a big misconception or mistone that a lot of people take after reading the book is that we are like destitute, uneducated people, and I have to always correct that. That maybe for some of the people that were interviewed, for the information that they received, depending on what era of the legacy they came from, may have been true. But as far as my generation, you know it was not a choice. It was what you were going to do to be educated. You were going to go to school. You were going to go to college. You would have a career and not a job. Education was really a big talking point in the family throughout my whole life. Even for my aunt Shirley, her children, like that was just something that people always think about us. And I like to say, no, that's not true. We actually have, not even just me as a nurse. I have a cousin that, has, 2 master's degrees in education. I have another one that is at, a mental health professional. Like, no, we do okay. We're on, as far as education, that's a big thing for us. And I feel like that's one of the biggest misconcepts. And also that, how much anger that it sometimes the tone may be picked up or portrayed by some people in there. I would not. We are a very boisterous, loud family. That is what we are. So sometimes people may take the passion of our tone or the infliction of our dialect as anger, but like, no, we're really just very upbeat, bubbly, like happy, loud people.
Yeah.
So sometimes that could be a miscommunication as well about us. But no, but we are a family that strives on making each generation better than the next. That is what I like to say about the in education portion of that.
Thank you. Shirley, what's your perspective? Anything else that you would like to add about the family?
Now that I don't have anything else, well, maybe just one point. As Victoria was talking about the book, and I think it's according to who's reading the book and how you're processing what's being written. And as far as, like Victoria said, the generation that was basically talked about in the book was basically, and hoping people won't think that Henrietta's entire generation is like what's in the book.
Right.
And they just want to make sure that when people read that book, there's another generation that's going on. And as Victoria said, that's very very educational. And also they take pride in what they do. They are vocal. They will state their opinion. They won't stand back and keep quiet like doing when that book was written. People don't written about the people in the book. They didn't talk a lot. They just kept quiet. But the generations, like Victoria's generations and a few generations under her, they're very boisterous. Like my youngest granddaughter, there's certain things that she hear about the family and she read in their book. She goes, "Oh, I can't believe that." No, they don't. And it's like, okay, calm down. They're not talking about you. They're talking about what took place. So that's the only part that I would just say as far as what Victoria was talking about, according to who's reading the book and who's processing it at that time when they're reading the book and who the book is talking about.
Right. We did have a question from the chat, and I want to make sure I get to this one. Has the family been given access to proprietary rights of the HeLa cells or some type of ongoing financial compensation?
No.
I thought I know the answer, but I was going to ask it anyway.
Thank you for your question. No, no, we haven't. That's the short answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you what do you think of the book, and do you think the book captures the real story of your family? I think we've kind of already talked about that a little bit.
The book, I feel like it did what it needed to do.
Yeah.
Start these conversations, give us, like I said, the springboard for us to have a platform to be able to advocate for, injustice, lack of, care, access to care for patients, all those barriers that, people face with low socioeconomic means and lack of education. So it did what it needed to do, as far as bringing awareness and starting those conversations. I don't think the book is big enough to capture the full family story. We would need like an Encyclopedia Britannica like version. I feel like to capture the full family story, the ins and outs of it. But I think she did good at making it not enough about science for people who were interested in science to want to seek more information about it, but also have more of a personality about it, talking more about the family and including the family in it, to include more lay people who aren't into science, to make them even more curious about STEM related, industries, and seeing like, oh, this is a such thing. Like, oh, you could be a part of an ethics board. Who knew? What is the IRB? Who knew about that?
Right.
So I feel like it definitely gave us, the opportunity to have a lot more in-depth conversations,
Mhm.
and bring awareness to different things in healthcare.
Yeah, and before I get to the last question, because we are coming up on the top of the hour, and I wanted to remind everyone who is listening and watching, to learn more about the Division of Health Disparities Elimination and this book series as we launch another book next month. More information to come on that. Go to www.healthdisparitiestn.com. If you would like to join the distribution list to receive this announcement as well as other announcements and funding opportunities, you can email me at elizabeth.hart@tn.gov. That's elizabeth.hart@tn.gov. So, in the final couple of minutes of this conversation, I really want to end on this question for the both of you. What do you believe is the legacy of Henrietta Lacks?
I kind of touched on that earlier, but I believe that the legacy of Henrietta Lacks is her family. And the reason that I believe that is because we are, descendants of her, and it is up to us to make sure that we keep her legacy alive by, continuously talking about who she was as a person, how we got to have these great medical finds, and also advocating to make sure that nobody else's mother goes through those things, or great grandmother, for you to not ever, for like my aunt Deborah to not get a chance to know her mother, because of, her health issues and choices that were made and things of that nature. So I feel like that's her legacy. We are her legacy as her family, and every one of you are part of her legacy by extension, because you've all been impacted in some way, shape, or form by her cells, and what herself have been able to make possible in science today. So yes, that's how I feel about who her legacy is.
And Shirley?
Victoria took it all. I just wanted just to say that I think that her legacy is, first of all, she was a woman, and she was, and as Victoria said, with the medical piece, she's a woman who helped with many, many medical breakthroughs. Without her and her cells, we wouldn't be as far advanced as we are now in medicine, and I think that's her legacy.
That is wonderful, and what a great way to end this conversation. For those that are on, let's give them a round of applause in the reactions of this webinar. We really appreciate you, Shirley, and you, Victoria, for joining us, for having this conversation, talking about the wonderful matriarch in your family that is Henrietta Lacks. We encourage all those who are still watching to download, to purchase the book that is on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and your local bookstore. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. We encourage you to read that book and then have a conversation not only with your family members, but your colleagues in your organizations. So again, once again, thank you, and thank you, Shirley and to Victoria.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you all for having us.
Nice.